I have seen all I care to see of this world. It has no more for me. I need the calm, forgiving peace that only comes from my family. I wanna go home. I wanna go home. I'm following the lead of the setting sun, and I'm going back where I came from. That's why I'm going home. I'm going home. I'm following the lead of the setting sun, and I'm going back where I came from. And I'm going back where I came from.
As much as viewers are probably excited to get into the story of how a Viking made it inside the US Capitol, as always, we are first making you eat your COVID-19 vegetables. As of time of writing, the total number of confirmed cases has risen slightly above 95 million globally, with the total number of deaths surpassing 2 million. Not much has changed in terms of podium places, with the United States, India, and Brazil still taking home those most case medals. Unfortunately, most COVID-19 related news is negative this month, as new and exciting strains of the virus have been discovered in the United Kingdom, United States, Brazil, and South Africa. Fortunately, the Plague Incorporated player, in this giant simulation we call Earth, decided to only make the new variant more contagious, and there is currently no indication that COVID-19 is any more deadly than it was previously. However, the new strains in Brazil and South Africa appear to be resistant to some of the vaccines currently in distribution, leading White House coronavirus expert Anthony Fauci to believe that modifications may have to take place if COVID-19 starts hitting the gym and shrugs off vaccination efforts. One of the many overlooked factors of the COVID-19 virus isn't the direct effects, but rather the strain it puts on hospitals, and in particular, the often fragile supply chain of medical equipment and supplies. 2 separate hospitals in Egypt had oxygen shortages on the same day this month, which unfortunately saw an entire ICU ward wiped out, resulting in the deaths of everyone treated inside. The situation wasn't much improved in better equipped countries, as hospitals in the UK and Los Angeles faced similar oxygen shortages, while Brazil saw patients die from asphyxiation after their own supply had run out. In response to the situation, the Brazilian Supreme Court ordered the government to present a response plan to solve the oxygen shortage, but President Bolsonaro rejected any responsibility for the city's lethal crisis, instead blaming it on local health authorities. President Bolsonaro has famously compared the coronavirus to a little flu, and in mid-December, told people who took the vaccine that it would be their own fault if it turned them into a crocodile. I fucking wish we were making this up. Help me, I am a crocodile now. At the same time, the smug fuckers in New Zealand have not only been experiencing 0 community cases, but have reported an 11% decrease in overall mortality, which is theorized to be due to similar transferable diseases being prevented, as well as a decrease in traffic accidents and pollution, due to lockdown measures. We now come to what many would call the main event of January, the storming of the US Capitol. As always, we try to keep the clusterfuck coverage of US politics as unbiased as we can, because as an Australian, I really don't give a fuck. On the 6th of January, the US Congress convened to certify the results of the US presidential election. However, during the process, a number of Republican representatives objected to the results, citing allegations of voter fraud. As we've discussed extensively before, virtually all of these claims of voter fraud have been proven false by conservative, liberal, and non-partisan pundits alike, and they've been no truer now than when we first started covering them in the middle of last year. The president at the time, Donald Trump, was perhaps the biggest proponent of the election fraud allegations, and in the days leading up to the storming, encouraged his most loyal supporters to rally and display their disappointment with the democratic process. This is where things become a bit more interpretive. In the days leading up to the storming of the US Capitol, Mr. Trump's language is undoubtedly quite inflammatory, encouraging his supporters to fight, take back their country, and stop the stealing of the election. President Trump, among many of his traits, tends to be very vague in how he words his ideas, and as a result, it can often be difficult to tell whether he means something figuratively or literally. Regardless of his intentions, Mr. Trump was quite successful at rallying supporters for his cause. However, it quickly became clear that this crowd was not made up of the average Republican voter. Many of those attending came wearing Nazi memorabilia, anti-Semitic t-shirts, and Confederate flags, all of which are generally frowned upon by the wider public. With the crowd now energized and encouraged by both the president and by a number of members of Congress, these rapscallions decided to live in the moment and start the process of storming the US Capitol. Many in the crowd smashed windows, fought against riot police, and some, but not others, were able to climb over the protective walls. The ease of which many of the participants were able to enter the Capitol has understandably come into question, which has led to the FBI investigating the Capitol Police after reports of some officers stationed in the area cooperating with the crowd and even letting them past certain barricades. Once inside, the crowd made history once again, as even over the 4-year Civil War, the Confederate flag never made it inside the US Capitol, but the Confederate Army was no match for whoever this guy was. As of time of writing, 5 people lost their lives in the halls of Congress during the storming, including one police officer and a woman who was shot attempting to enter a room containing the vice president. The other 3 were members of the crowd who were either trampled, died of a stroke, or had a heart attack. A few other members of the crowd were found to have handcuffs and improvised explosives, but fortunately neither were used during the storming. While this was happening, President Trump took to Twitter and called several members of Congress, as well as Vice President Mike Pence, liars, cowards, and weak. The president was hesitant to clear a request from the mayor of DC to send in the National Guard to stop the Capitol storming. However, after several hours, Vice President Pence eventually made the call to send in National Guard support. Once they arrived, the Capitol building was quickly cleared out, and the area was then sanitized in order to ensure members of Congress could finish the count of electoral votes. Perhaps unsurprisingly, some Republican members decided to rescind their objections upon returning. Once the smoke cleared around the Capitol, the consequences for the president began to take shape, as social media companies began banning his accounts after making their own conclusions that he incited violence within DC. This kind of ban wave didn't stop at just Twitter, as Facebook, Twitch, YouTube, Reddit, and Snapchat all banned Mr. Trump from their services, while Spotify, Pinterest, Shopify, Discord, and Stripe removed many communities associated with the president. Perhaps one of the most supportive social media sites of Mr. Trump, Parler, was taken down completely by Amazon's hosting service, but was later restored with the help of an overseas digital infrastructure company. A huge ban wave of conspiracy accounts over both Twitter and Facebook followed the US Capitol incident, which did of course raise the question of whether social media sites have too much power over what can and can't be said on the internet. Having a select handful of people essentially able to decide what is and isn't appropriate to be shared on social media sites is a scary concept, which becomes even more frightening when you consider that these are just employees of privately owned companies. At the same time, the ability for people to now live in their own insulated online bubble, which never challenges their beliefs and only serves to reinforce and radicalize their worldview, is arguably just as dangerous, and as demonstrated at the start of January, can have very real and meaningful consequences. This is a debate for another time, but unless this is addressed soon, it's very likely that such an incident may be repeated. Perhaps one of the strangest parts of the Capitol storming was that despite everyone involved committing an exciting cornucopia of crimes. Many of the participants viewed the storming as a necessary and even patriotic pursuit. It would be easy to dismiss this perception as a fringe view by only some of the most loyal supporters of Mr. Trump. However, in a YouGov poll following the incident, 1 in 5 voters were found to approve of the Capitol storming. Unsurprisingly, like almost all political opinions within the country, the perception of the event was very much divided on party lines, with 45% of Republicans showing approval, as opposed to only 2% of Democrats. Interestingly, according to a poll taken mid-November, 52% of Republican voters also said that Mr. Trump rightfully won the presidential election. This is important to understand, especially to an outsider like myself, as many people unfamiliar with the state of politics in the United States would wonder why the fuck so many people would film themselves storming the Capitol, especially if they had no intention of hiding their identity. Due to this noble cause secret ingredient, the FBI was said to have had the best day in their history since George Bush passed the Patriot Act in 2001. As of time of writing, 100 arrests have already been made, with 100 more well on the way. The entire Capitol storming did seem to draw attention away from the fact that the United States swore in its new president, Joe Biden, who is best known for playing old Captain America in Avengers Endgame.
No, I don't think I will.
The inauguration ceremony was fucking strange in and of itself, with the crowd replaced with a bunch of flags, the former president deciding to not attend, Lady Gaga singing for some reason, and Bernie Sanders becoming a victim of the Photoshop special forces. The Swag News team wanted to make a full list of immediate changes Joe Biden made upon taking office. However, we decided it would be best to leave it till next month, so we can do the topic more justice. The nation of Argentina rarely comes up in this series, which is mostly because of the batshit insane nation of Venezuela stealing the South American spotlight, like the time the Venezuela Navy picked a fight with a civilian ship and fucking lost. January however saw the country make headlines, becoming the third nation in South America to legalize widespread abortion, coming in at a much wider margin than expected of 38 to 29. Supporters of the decision took to a night of celebration, with music, dancing, and the signature green handkerchiefs, which have become a regional symbol for women's rights in recent times. The push for equality has seen some impressive strides within Argentina over the last few years, with one senator in favor of the new law, explaining that over her lifetime, she gained the right to vote, inherit wealth, manage her own assets, own a bank account and credit card, and attend university. This isn't to say there hasn't been strong opposition to this new stance on abortion. Most notably, the Roman Catholic Church and a number of evangelical Protestant churches who have joined forces and organized impressive opposition rallies across the country. Unfortunately for the churches, the recent rise in secularism, which is the separation of church and state, has eroded much of its political sway that was once present within the country. This dilution of political influence, mainly spurred on by younger voters, is undoubtedly a huge factor in the decision, as a person's stance on abortion is heavily influenced by their religious values, as many anti-abortion advocates believe that life starts at conception, as opposed to supporters who believe it starts somewhere in the formation of a conscious human. It is unlikely that the two sides could ever come to an agreement when they can't settle on the basic facts of the argument. Like all long debated problems, it probably wouldn't exist if there was a simple solution. The politicians who voted in favor of legalization have made it clear that they did not see the matter as a moral issue, rather a matter of public health. According to Amnesty International, the rate of abortion worldwide isn't at all affected by the legality of the country where it is performed, and a World Health Organization study from 2006 believed that these black market abortions worldwide result in an estimated 22,800 deaths per year. This would mean that on paper, legalizing abortion would still lead to more lives saved over the long term. It's similar to when the TSA made United States airports a clusterfuck after 9/11, making more Americans decide to drive instead of taking the statistically safer method of flying, leading to the increased security measures, actually causing more deaths for US citizens. The outcomes to many issues usually aren't obvious until you make a bunch of people much smarter than myself figure it out, whether that be security related deaths, abortion, or how the fuck the Venezuelan Navy lost to a fucking passenger ship.
What?
If only the Venezuelan military was equipped with the latest in stealth technology, just like today's sponsor. If you're trying to remain invisible online, or just trying to watch region-locked content, then you'll probably want a VPN. Surfshark VPN makes protecting your online privacy and watching prohibited Netflix shows as easy as throwing mankind off the top of the Hell in the Cell in 1998, and Surfshark is the only VPN to use real sharks to viciously hunt down any online intruders. Gone are the days of giving your computer cyber raids just because you wanted to download linkinpark.exe or some movie theater recording of the Simpsons movie 6 months before release. Simply change your location to anywhere you'd like and enjoy being a fully fledged citizen of the world. Signing up with the code on screen will give viewers an 83% discount, 3 months for free, and viewers who aren't 100% satisfied can back out in the first 30 days and get a full refund. Surfshark VPN. It's cheaper than the other ones.
That's a 10.
Meanwhile, the Missouri House of Representatives shuts down over COVID concerns. 2 days after voting against a mask mandate, a woman holding a "Don't Tread on Me" flag is trampled to death, and the South African president offers to share lessons for a peaceful democratic transition with the United States. We now come to news about China, which long-time viewers will know usually isn't a good sign. In recent years, the country has faced an unfortunate trend of people disappearing, including activists, publishers, journalists, or even high-profile public figures. The latest of which was billionaire Jack Ma, who was missing from the public eye for 3 months, before finally releasing a 50-second video congratulating teachers supported by his foundation, while making no mention of his disappearance. It's suspected that his vanishing was linked to an anti-regulation speech he gave in October of last year, which led him to fall out of favor with the nation's current president, Xi Jinping, seen here, gorging himself on honey in the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs. We can't be certain that the vanishing of Jack Ma was truly a government-orchestrated disappearance, but if I was a betting man, I'd be very comfortable putting my life savings on the prospect. A big reason behind this level of confidence is that since at least 2017, the Chinese government has forcibly placed over 1 million ethnic Uyghurs or other such undesirables into concentration camps for reasons as arbitrary as growing a beard, owning a compass, or knowing someone who has traveled abroad. These re-education camps, as categorized by the government, have gained a reputation for mass imprisonment, forced labor, indoctrination, and forced sterilization. The good news is that January finally saw the United States officially designate the situation as a genocide, which currently serves as one of the strongest condemnations of China's actions to date. Although many might assume that this would be introduced in the first few days of Joe Biden taking office, it was actually one of the last actions taken by the Trump administration, right next to giving a presidential pardon to Lil Wayne. The Trump administration also banned all imports of cotton and tomatoes from the Xinjiang region of China, citing human rights violations and the widespread use of forced labor. Although the United States is confident in putting such a label in place, considering its not so proud familiarity with forced labor in the past, the United Kingdom has yet to condemn China for its genocidal tendencies, with UK Prime Minister and Mad Max villain Boris Johnson insisting that the clarification should be determined by courts and judges. The annual report by Human Rights Watch, released at the start of January, states that China is now in the darkest period for human rights since the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre, as the crackdown on Hong Kong, tightening internet censorship, and attempts to cover up the COVID-19 outbreak are all part of the deteriorating situation under President Xi Jinping. January saw 3 reports released regarding the deterioration of the environment, but because you've probably heard this shit a million times before, and because not much news is out, which will actually help things, we are just going to speedrun all 3 to save time. The first report warns that humans are driving other species to extinction 1,000 times faster than what is considered natural, and this lack of biodiversity is resulting in soil degradation, more intense natural disasters, and reduced carbon removed from the atmosphere. The second report is all about the Amazon rainforest, warning that the entire fucking thing could collapse by the year 2064 due to mass deforestation and the climate crisis set to stunlock the water cycle. The most likely outcome by the same year is probably serious damage, which is only lessened by billions of dollars to combat the shrinking decline, at which time high school dropouts will smugly claim that idiot scientists were once again wrong in their prediction. The third report was a collaboration between 17 scientists who claim that the consequences of climate change will make the COVID-19 pandemic look like the vision of a better time, and unless urgent action is taken immediately, mass extinctions, extreme human migration, conflicts over resources, and enormous death tolls is destined to be a reality. As one silver lining, the United States has entered back into the Paris Climate Agreement. However, that's a story we want to cover in more depth next month. Long-time viewers will know about the story of Alexei Navalny, the Russian opposition leader, who we've been covering since August last year. To get up to speed, Mr. Navalny was poisoned by the Russian government, transferred to a specialist clinic in Germany while spending several weeks in a coma, then only last month posed as a top-ranking Russian official over the phone and personally debriefed a member of the team who poisoned him. After baffling scientists who still wonder how he's still able to walk with such enormous testicles, Mr. Navalny surprised everyone once again by taking a flight to Moscow Sheremetyevo Airport, where he was immediately arrested by Russian authorities. The official reason for the arrest was for multiple violations of a 2014 suspended sentence for fraud, as he failed his obligations to check in with Russian authorities twice a month, mostly on account of being poisoned and left comatose for several weeks. For those paying attention, this does indeed mean that he was arrested for not dying as intended, with Mr. Navalny being detained at an undisclosed location, as well as his lawyer being unable to speak with him. It appears as if the process to arrest the opposition leader is infinitely more illegal than what he did to get there in the first place. As of time of writing, it is unclear what will happen to Alexei Navalny. However, before being taken away, he made it clear that he was not afraid of being arrested. After he was detained, his team released a nearly 2-hour documentary where Navalny sheds light on the Russian president's billion-dollar property, which he alleges was paid for with the biggest bribe in world history. 3 days after it was uploaded to his YouTube channel, the video has been viewed a fucking astronomical 68 million times. Needless to say, we'll be covering any developments of the story into the coming months. The digital currency, Bitcoin, rose to an all-time high this month, briefly being worth 40,000 freedom bucks apiece, doubling its previous record, set in 2017. Bitcoin, once only worth a few cents a decade ago, has now become a staple for many investment firms, and due to its anonymous nature, has become a favorite of professional criminals around the world. This wasn't even the most interesting money-related story from January, with Elon Musk briefly becoming the richest person in the world, being worth $203 billion. This was down to the share price of Tesla, in which he owns a 22% stake, increasing from $685 to $880 in only a week. By the end of the month, Musk went back to being a peasant when Tesla stocks went down, but Musk has long been known to have an almost mystic influence over the stock market. On the 7th of January, a 2-word tweet which read, "Use Signal," led to more than an 11,000% price increase in the stock price of a company called Signal Advance. However, the stock then dipped dramatically when he clarified that he was instead talking about a non-profit app that was not listed on the stock market at all. Another story that was too late in our production cycle to properly cover was how the share price of GameStop rose nearly 2,000% in a single month. However, we plan to make a dedicated video on the topic going into February. Until then, hold the line you dumb fucks. With the COVID-19 pandemic highlighting the growing level of inequality around the world. Billionaire investor Bill Ackman has proposed a long-term plan in an attempt to narrow this gap. The proposal he named Birthright would see the government grant $6,750 to all US citizens at birth, which would then be invested into zero-cost equity index funds, completely inaccessible for the next 65 years. As this likely makes no fucking sense to people outside of finance, it essentially means that by the time a person retires at age 65, their government granted pile of cash, assuming a historical compounding interest rate of 8%, will have grown to over $1 million, meaning all babies born under this scheme will be guaranteed millionaires by the time they retire. Mr. Ackman reasons that capitalism as a system would become fundamentally stronger if the lowest earning members of society could more personally witness its success, as he believes that wages have not kept pace with the rate of wealth creation from the stock market. This isn't to say that there isn't a fair share of critics to this proposal, the most obvious of which is the enormous cost to taxpayers at an estimated $26 billion a year, especially when none of them will actually benefit from this proposal, and arguably no one will, for an entire 65 years after the plan is first implemented. In the short term, it's absolutely true that paying the burden of both elderly citizens as well as this birthright plan would be extremely costly to the US budget. However, once these citizens actually start reaching retirement age, it becomes astronomically cheaper for the taxpayer. For example, even if the money granted at birth was an entire $30,000, which would allow people to retire with over $5 million in their bank account, this program would still end up being 15 times cheaper in the long term, as opposed to the extreme costs of supporting retired workers. In essence, it would be shifting the burden of retirement pensions from taxpayers to the financial markets. Another criticism, which might just be the biggest factor going against this plan, is the fact that most people tend to turn into absolute smooth-brain idiots when they are suddenly handed a large amount of money. According to some sources, around a third of all lottery winners end up declaring bankruptcy, and many of the highest paid sports leagues have mandatory financial advice seminars, because even some of the highest paid athletes in the world have been known to lose everything due to financial illiteracy. Without safeguards put in place to stop people from speedrunning the entire pot, taxpayers might just end up paying for a person twice. There's also the fact that many people aren't comfortable with the government handling their retirement money, and many others who simply make the argument that this kind of program shouldn't be the function of government at all. The main advantage of this proposal seems to be both the enormous long-term benefits, but mostly because compared to a person who enters the workforce at 18 with no savings for retirement, people under this system would instead already be worth over $28,000. It's unlikely that such a scheme would ever be put in place within the United States, but it's at the very least a fun thought experiment for students of economics. Now that the news is over, we'd like to make some exciting announcements. Due to a slow but steady increase in Patreon supporters, a few potential sponsor opportunities, and the feedback from last month's survey, the news team is embarking on a small expansion, meaning applications for 2 spots on the team are now open and in the description. The first position is a dedicated gaming writer who can cover all aspects of the industry and will be taking on the expansion of gaming news on the channel. The second position is a fact checker/writer who will be able to navigate some of the more controversial parts of what we cover, so we can be more confident across topics that tend to get a bit convoluted. Both these roles will hopefully make the news better, while also freeing up more time for other projects. If you're interested in either of these positions, the application link will be waiting down below. Moving on to the admittedly exciting results of the survey itself. From the 11,000 respondents who had their say in terms of whether a human narrator or a text-to-speech voice should be used, over 80% voted to keep things exactly how they are. Unsurprising, when all my previous voiced videos performed like absolute dogshit. When looking at the length for the news, the majority of people had no preference and wished it to be dictated by the content, and only 3% of viewers wanted the news to be shorter than 10 minutes. In terms of the most requested features, a dedicated fact checker was very much in the leading position for most people's first place preference. Higher overall production value and original stories both also saw some decent support, while the option for a person to make jingles about why war crimes are bad scored second for first place preferences. Unsurprisingly, getting a human voiceover came clearly in last place. For the most interesting concepts, it seems that the most popular suggestions were dedicated storytelling videos about historical events, news without the bullshit, but for a time in the past or future, and a fact-checking segment. Opinion pieces and shorter explainer videos saw less than half of respondents interested, while only 15% were attracted to the idea of post-video streams or Q&A sessions. When looking at perceived bias, 69% of respondents viewed the channel to have little to no bias at all, followed by nearly 29% reporting a slightly left-leaning bias. This is difficult to properly gauge, as depending on the country, some ideas are far more radical than others. For example, healthcare is often seen as a very left-wing position within the United States. However, has been supported by some of the most conservative UK prime ministers since the mid-1940s. This will always be a difficult balance to strike, but we plan to be very attuned to the feedback of viewers. In terms of factual reporting, we are quite happy to say that our most common rank was a 9 out of 10, which is around the level that some of the most reputable sources such as the Associated Press, Bloomberg, and Reuters aim to achieve. It's our hope that the fact-checking position can help more easily tackle these harder topics. The intro sequences and transitions portion was pretty straightforward, as the overwhelming majority was either happy with them or trusted us to do what we feel is better. When asked whether the news should have a bigger focus on reporting or entertainment, less than 2% opted for the latter. However, 69% said they would prefer a balance of both. Nice. Next up was the tough decision of forcing viewers to choose between either news or gaming videos, in which nearly 90% of respondents chose news. Despite going on record in 2018 to say I would never become a news channel, it seems as if that's very much the direction viewers want this ship to steer. Another very interesting finding is that 70% of viewers would welcome appearances by other notable personalities. This has been taken into consideration. The very last point to talk about is when asked what types of Patreon rewards viewers would like. Over 70% stated that they just wanted to support the news. The second most popular answer was behind the scenes videos for this series, which is quite fortunate, because along with the behind the scenes video of how we write and research the news that was put up last month, we now have an entire video of how Smurfs and the editor works his magic to make the news look so damn sexy. As another incentive, if the next stretch goal for Patreon is reached, I'll make an entire video about how to get good at beating up children. If that gets reached, then God help us if we have to subject ourselves to the battle royale of viewer voted content as the next stretch goal. As always, all relevant links to keep up with the channel, apply for a writing position, or support us on Patreon will be in the description. On behalf of the entire team, I'd like to wish everyone a happy February of 2021.